listening to In-Fisherman Storyline, North America's top voice in multi-species freshwater angling. Here is your host, Thomas Allen.
Hey, welcome to another edition of In-Fisherman Storyline. This is the hard copy edition. We haven't done one of these in a while. Would love to get into the habit of doing them more often, but we've got a very special edition of In-Fisherman Magazine we're going to talk to. I brought the Brain Trust in. Over here is Jim Nagy, our art director, who had a big part in making this as beautiful as it is. And then, of course, editor-in-chief Doug Stange, and then managing editor Rob Neumann. Collectively, they're about 3 to 4 times my age. And the experience is obvious. So, we would like to dig into some of the work that went into producing our 50th anniversary edition of In-Fisherman Magazine, which was the March-April edition of 2025. And I think it's nice when we get feedback on a magazine, and we don't always get feedback. Sometimes you might bump into somebody that says, hey, I like this, I like that. But this particular one has... we've heard some things. Jim, did you leave this nice little piece of paper here?
I did.
Yeah, let's talk about that.
Yeah, read that out. That was sent to Steve Quinn, and by a longtime subscriber from the very beginning. He has some kind words to say there. Well,
it's nice to hear things. Let me read this. This is from Bill, a since the beginning subscriber. He said, I have been reading In-Fisherman since 1975 when the first magazines were study issues, and I never missed an issue since. From all my readings and observations, the 50th anniversary magazine issue is the very best issue ever. I enjoyed all of the articles on the history and the focus on great writing, artwork, learning lessons, and fishing enjoyment in the magazines, TV and radio shows, and of course all the DVDs. Special thanks to the great team over the years for making everything possible for over 50. That's pretty awesome. That's a pat on the back. We're bragging a little bit, but it's nice to have positive feedback.
It's just nice to hear that because we in this building know what went into it, and we don't need a pat on the back, but it's nice to hear that kind of stuff because we did work a lot of long hours to get this one done and done right, and just to hear that from especially a longtime reader is awesome. So.
Things have changed tremendously. Did you have to sort through mail back in the day, Doug, to go through comments and?
Oh yeah,
I'm not sure it was a stack of mail.
Of course, every day.
Yeah. The digital age has changed that. We might hear from people, but to have something show up right now, it means a lot.
People really, even with the email, they don't have the access. I don't think. Your email address isn't out there. Everybody had the old mail address, to get at you. And I still get like 2 or 3 letters a week and still have to answer, hard copy letters, as well as a few emails. But yeah, this issue is on newsstands right now. And yes, it was a great work in progress for the 51st for In-Fisherman. That took us, I would say, 9 months to finally complete that. So you go through it once and you do this sort of, as you're saying, storyline. And then it has to just sit there, and then you realize, if you're going back 50 years, you lay in bed at night and you think, holy moly, I forgot that. What about this? That's a great story, and so on and so on. So, it really takes time. I look at these magazines as sort of, first of all, I think this is the greatest fishing writing group that we've ever had. So you've got Quinn, you've got Straw, you've got all of these people. They are immensely not just talented, but experienced, and I should say maybe experienced and talented. So to me, sitting here, because I often am the one who does the initial assigning, so it's kind of like putting together this grand orchestra. And so first you have to decide what you want your chorus people to sing, but in the beginning you need great people with great voices in the choir, and we have that. These are amazing people. So then you come up with this sort of okay, what do you want them to sing in this, this time? And so then you give them these assignments. You know already that they're going to be, do well. And sometimes you're just amazed. Like I mean, Pizer, and these guys are amazing. They're amazing. And so you give them these assignments, and then you sit back and you watch. And Rob is really the one who finally then puts this orchestra together. He's the one who goes through the, I do some of the initial edits, but he's really the one who does that. And so it all comes together with his expertise there, and you sit down and you see what you got. You open it up. First of all, it's always Larry Tople to begin things, which is always amazing, the cover art to begin with. And Jim and I were talking yesterday. It doesn't just have to look great on the newsstand, because most of our people don't buy on the newsstands anymore. They're subscribers. So I think it's like 80% of our people are subscribers. So when you get this in your hand, it's got to feel, it's got to look amazing. Mm-hmm. And you have to, I say this is, a class act to begin with, and then you start paging through. But enough here for just a second anyway.
Well, mm-hmm. I think you're right. I've noticed this when I go through Fleet Farm or if I'm at Walmart. It has a element of popping out, and I don't know if there's a rule, about dark and shiny colors. You'll talk about this in a minute, Jim, because I had a question on how we did that. But it really has just a shelf presence, mm-hmm. and I think that was the initial plan when we went through the cover variations. Again, that'll be part of what we get into, but. Laying this out, Rob, having this have a feel cover to cover. I have read this cover to cover. This mm-hmm. is one of the first magazines in a long time. I won't tell you where I read this. You can probably figure that out. But I did I got through a lot of it, and everything is good. It's just a good read, but you had to discover and create a flow.
Yeah, and I think that started almost 9 months ahead of time, when Doug kind of laid out and brainstormed a flow and a content of the thing, So the topics were arrived at, kind of massaged over the time, and then it kind of falls into a natural order. This one follows sort of the natural order of our magazine, but where we start with the features and the columns, but it just has more columns and perspectives along the way that really round out the history and so on. So, it sort of naturally falls into place with the flow. Mm-hmm. Until you get to the real end and you're working with production managers and you're trying to figure out what pages work where, and you're fitting different things and pieces of the puzzle together.
Well, and this particular time of year for all of us is very busy, because we have the single issue time of year. We're kicking out March and April, then mm-hmm. there's May, then there's June and July, and it's one, and then there's Walleye Guide and Bass Guide in there and whatever else going on. So we have this constant flow of we're receiving work, we're editing work, but we're finishing up work in a magazine, and then you're juggling a lot. So to have this come out the way it did, it's no surprise. But for it to be this strong, I can look back, happy I contributed, and it's very powerful, and I'm proud of it. So, I mean, it's not just the content, it's the look, the feel, the gloss, but, I mean, just mm-hmm. Fun publication start to finish. So, Jim, let's go back to you and talk about the cover variations. I think last year when we first hatched the idea, there was you have it right there, a version of the cover that included other covers.
Yeah. So what we initially did, and we knew this was coming, so a year ahead of time, Todd, our publisher, wanted to see some looks. What was this going to look like? So the idea came up of, why don't we show a bunch of our old covers on the magazine? And so I came up with a quick layout. We all agreed that was kind of cool, and then we kind of put it aside for a while. Then when we actually started working on we were getting much closer and needed to work on the magazine, I believe Doug, I brought this one back out with all the real covers in, and I believe Doug said, well, can we take a look at it without the covers? Mm-hmm. And when we did that, I mean, this turned out to be such a classy look that everyone agreed that, the covers needed to go.
Yeah.
So.
Well, and it's a less is more case, right?
Right. And it's just, it's hard to argue. This is such a classy looking cover that the covers were cool, and we ended up using them throughout the issue. But they didn't belong on the cover. So this was really the classiest way to represent the 50th year.
Well, and that particular image is there's a stand behind you of a cover with that same fish on it. For some reason, that's either a very popular cover. I know we've used. Is this the second time that particular image has been used, or a couple?
It would be the second time. So that's the other thing. Larry Tople passed away this past August. And he hasn't been painting for like 6 years or 7. And so we have been recycling covers, trying to have at least a decade between when you see a cover. But these are so incredible that, they're timeless. And this particular, I think, potentially is, at least for me, it's the best smallmouth painting, I think, of all time. It captures, first of all, this is our standard bearer fish. It always has been from the beginning. The smallmouth has always been, what's the word I'm looking for? The
flagship species?
Well, yeah, like that, So, and
The avatar.
no,
Quintessential.
no, but what? Gee, I can't think of it. And it'll come to me. So anyway, this cover, to me, is the best smallmouth painting of all time. It just captures the essence of the fish. The fish in all its glory. It's, what it does so well, jump. It's spectacularly beautiful. And then if you look at Tople paintings, you realize, you can go from scale to eye to mouth. Everything is perfect and thought out in this exquisite detail. So it just seemed to me that, given that it was our fish, the fish of In-Fisherman, that we should have a smallmouth, and that was the best one to me that I've ever seen, I think, although there are other great ones, obviously. So,
well, and this is a good segue to a future podcast we're going to run here probably in the next few weeks. And Jim and Chuck sat down and we went through a lot of the Tople art, and it's kind of an intro to the science and his vision, and I think we'd all agree that there's not a lot of fish art out there that captures fish like Tople. In fact, probably none. It's as good as it gets. There, the way the fish is positioned, its dimensions, its color, the way that it's maybe there's a fish that's kind of canted underwater looking up at a pad. He really focused on those real life scenes, and one of the things, Jim, I want to bring this back to you again, is he used a lot of dark colors in his paintings, and you talked about that.
Right. Yeah, I remember talking to Larry years ago about this, and I'm an illustrator, but never even close to the level that Larry was. But he was telling me the way he actually paints, kind of in the way we're taught, is almost backwards. He starts dark and works light forward, which is totally against what we as artists were taught. But to me, it brought this depth and everything, the highlights and everything actually pop even more so because of the way he did that. And I found that really interesting, and talking to him about
heard that before.
Yeah, it was
interesting.
Yeah, it's amazing. And it was great talking to him. I had a few conversations with him, back, 20 some years ago, and he was a character and just a great guy to talk to. So,
well, a guy that loved to fish too, right?
Yep.
I mean, he wasn't
absolutely a great fisherman.
Well, there's a great feature in here, Rob. It looks like Doug wrote it with Chuck, and Chuck Beasley has worked tirelessly with the In-Fisherman brand for many years as well.
Oh, yeah.
But there's a cool feature in here on, let's see, looks like page 22, and it kind of goes through some of the progression of Tople's art, and these are, we actually dug into some of these paintings during our podcast, so you'll have a full deep dive into some of this stuff, but it's a look at his magic. It's a look at his talent as an artist.
Yeah, and fish are just very difficult to illustrate, paint. Just the way they bend, the way they move, their fins. It's really difficult to capture that natural flow of a fish, and it's different ways that you can present them, and swimming and so on and so forth. So just the talent to be able to do that's incredible.
Well, and some of these pictures to me, like, they remind me of experiences, and I think that's what he was able to capture.
Right.
Is you could feel or recall something that looked like this.
Yeah, exactly. And it's just like this one with the there's a bass that's going after a bunch of different minnows, and you just want to think about maybe one of those is my bait in there. Is it going to take the bait that's in that pot of fish it's going after? But the article really does go through that whole versatility of what he was able to do from cartoon type illustrations to.
Well, when you were writing something and you knew that your writing was going to go to Tople, you just sat back breathlessly waiting to see what the hell he would come up with. And, for the many years that I wrote and did stories on Toad Smith, for example. So, and we all knew, and Chuck, when we mentioned Chuck Beasley, he worked with Larry as our art director for like 15 or 18 years. I forget what it was. So a long time, very close relationship there. So, but I mean, these cartoons were just off the wall, but they were also as the one there where there was a mention of the apostles and the famous story of the parable of walking on water and the boys throwing out the net and getting 151 or 153 fish exactly. I don't remember. It's one of those, so that that you had to go on shore and count all these fish just like a fisherman would do, and. So it's just amazing.
And some of those cartoons, I don't know if he did it with all of them, but there's always sort of like this personal inside thing where it's sort of like trying to find the Easter egg that he put in there, It was like there was something funny that he included,
Well, that particular one, I think that was the favorite painting we discussed, Jim, was that the parable with Jesus walking on the water, because you got the guy in the back holding the bass up like a pro angler, and the guy snagging off the one side.
Right. Yep.
Well, and the observation by Chuck that the guy snagging had to be Judas. Yeah. Was a pretty good stuff.
There's just a lot of brilliance in that. And it doesn't just stop with the art on the cover of the magazine and what's throughout, as there are numbers, as Doug was alluding to, there are writers that have contributed to this magazine for decades. And it's not just a talent or ability to put into words what they're able to do. Is they go out and they practice what they preach. And I think that's something that's always been very important in fishermen, is that you fish and you contribute based on your experience on the water with a combination of science and making it work in real life.
Right. And there's always been a bent from the very beginning towards some sort of scientific connection to so that's why Steve Quinn, certified fishery scientist, first of his kind, as an editor in all of Outdoors, as a editor in that sense in 1988, when we hired him. But all of these people, and Matt doesn't have Matt Straw, who has written more words probably than any other writer in the history of fishing on smallmouth bass, but he writes about everything. Mm-hmm. He may not have a science background, but they all have a deep curiosity about the science and how it comes in. And then we've got writers like, again, Quinn, and of course, Dr. Hal Schramm has contributed mightily in the last decade to what we've been doing.
And Gord's
and Gord has a science background. And of course, our managing editor here, besides me, has a doctorate and was a fisheries professor, taught, before he came and took over, like the bits and pieces column and that kind of thing. So but that's only part of it. But that's an important part, because with science, there's always something new going on. You always have something new to write about. And the science, most people don't. I mean, you can always go back and put new things together based on that. But then it also has to be based on, hardcore, field fishing too. It can't be just some scientist sitting there dabbling in this and that. So these boys all fish too. And that's the way it is.
Mm-hmm. Rob, this part had to have been a tremendous amount of work, but the 51st for In-Fisherman, just going through all these different years, and you see the 1983 was the first walleye guide, and we also just released walleye guide here, similar to the timing of this magazine.
Yeah.
As you're going through and putting this together, or we're putting this together, were there some specific things you're like, oh, I forgot all about that, or this was such an important time for In-Fisherman, there were elements that just stood out to you?
Oh, sure. And that particular column, that 51st, was something that was kind of Doug's kind of brainchild, and because Doug's been here longer than any of us, so he has that memory of all of these various things, significant things that happened along the way. So that list was.
That's why it's important we do these podcasts.
Yeah.
And that list was put together, and then it was kind of circulated around the staff. And did we forget anything, or was there anything else that was important? And a few other things popped up, and it turned out that there was well over 50 things that we could have written about, and those are sort of the 50 that we've kind of all arrived at in the end. And it's just really cool to go through that and dig through the archives and find the paintings
idea
and
had
things
actually come. We did one of those for our 25th anniversary. So you go back 25 years ago, and we had done one just like that, basically. So that's where the idea sort of came from. Well, the idea actually came from Todd Seisner, our publisher. So,
but then there was the how do you lay it out and make it look like that in a timeline fashion? And Jim did such a great job.
Oh, it's so easy to
laying
read.
that out.
It really is.
Yeah, and initially we wanted to do a traditional timeline, across the whole thing. But there was so much information involved that you couldn't just eliminate that. You have to tell the story.
Yeah.
So this was the best layout for as much information as we had. So, yeah.
Well, and Rob talked to this too. Then we're regardless of how great this magazine is, I think we could have made it much thicker and.
For sure.
It could have been a book. So we're
Yeah.
even though it's a great issue, it's a hallmark issue. We're still restricted on page count and ads that have to appear and things like that. How did you come by that balance?
I mean, early on when we're developing the contents, we have an idea of how many pages we're going to have. And that comes from, above, it might be an 80-page magazine or a 72-page magazine. And
usually it's 68.
yeah, usually 68, but you just try to figure out what you can get in there, assuming, there's going to be a certain amount of advertising and so on.
Well, I think something that stood out to me, and this is, I believe in this equation or this algorithm, if you will, the F+L+P = S is something that has stood the test of time here since it was introduced into the In-Fisherman pages of the magazine. But that's something that is amazing to me in a world of rapidly advancing technology and gimmick after gimmick, and then occasionally you find a lure that you got to have no matter what. It'd be heartbreaking if they discontinued it. We could come up with a few. That theory still seems to hold true in all fishing scenarios.
That is the basis by which everybody operates who's successful, whether they know it or not. You have to understand the fish species, so that's the F. And then that leads you to understanding something about where the fish might be, which is the L, so fish plus location. And then that leads you where the fish are, the habitat, the nature of the fish, the time of the year, which is we have calendar periods that fish go through. That leads you to pick out a presentation, and there could be a variety of them that would work in any given situation. So F+L+P = S, the success, that's the formula. So you could go to a bass pro who is highly successful, who has never heard of In-Fisherman, and if you were to look at what he's doing or she's doing, you would find that they are proceeding through what they're doing by this formula. So that's why it was such a breakthrough when the Linders came up with this.
Was that around the time you had started here, or was that even before that?
No, that was part of the original concept behind In-Fisherman. The earliest first study reports featured that formula for success. The original magazines were thought to be first. If you look at some of those first ones, that was the formula by which they put the magazine together. So to begin one of these study reports, they would talk about the nature of the fish, and then that would lead to location, and that would lead to presentation, all in one issue. Later, what they did was they would do one issue on the nature of a fish species, and then the next issue would be on location, or that kind of thing. So, but that was from the very beginning. That is the way the boys, I'm sure you were talking with Al, at some of your podcasts. That was the way by which they did their lure sales before they started In-Fisherman. They would barnstorm around the country, and they would go into an area, And I've mentioned this many times before, but so you had this cadre of very small group of people who know more about fishing than anybody else in the country. And these guys, Al and Ron, and like Gary Roach and some of these guys, could go into an area and do better fishing than people who had been there their entire life because they knew these principles behind this, success. So they would go into an area, they'd make a big stringer shot, and that was all part and parcel of selling Lindy rigs and whatever else they were trying to sell. So this sort of preceded even the 1975 version of what became In-Fisherman Magazine.
Mm-hmm. Rob, you are a scientific mind, and I love how that doesn't come across in any conversation we have. You when we dig into facts and information, it's there. You have it, but you don't wear that on your sleeve. But I want you to dig into some stuff here. Your time in this industry at this magazine has been it's extensive, like a lot of the writers we've had here. Talk a little bit about your perception of the evolution of fishing technology. And I don't mean the green box compared to forward-facing sonar. I mean the technology of fishing from your early days to now, and how you've perceived that through the magazine over the years.
Oh, how it relates. Yeah. So, I mean, it's just been incredible over that time frame, and how things have changed from rods and reels, materials, tackle, line, lures, how we understand more about fish and how to trigger fish responses with color, action, vibration of presentations, how to, retrievals. It's just been a constant evolution of an understanding, and it all goes back to that F and the F+L+P and understanding the fish and what it takes to find them, where they're going to be, different seasons, and so on.
It seems, though, that as we go through the transition of old to new, or old school to new school, whatever you want to call it, there are, and we don't need to call any of these out, but there are gimmicks. But once in a while, there's game changers. There are products that just absolutely changed the game in fishing, and I feel like there were more of those early, right?
Yeah.
So many of those innovations.
That's always the way it works.
Right.
Yep.
If you look at that 50 timeline, it's heavily weighted towards the first 20 years.
Yeah.
So it's like a reservoir, it blooms and then things slow down.
That 70s and 80s period was sort of like a golden age of
Absolutely.
discovery for lack of a better term, but not only in fishing, but also in fishery science, I think. That was a time period where
that was part of the key, that the two went right hand in hand. And we were part and parcel of keying those two together. Before, as we've often said, in the very beginning, fishermen did what they did and scientists did what they did, and there wasn't this back and forth. And there was all this stuff that was being done in science that the fishermen weren't hearing about, from limnology to, what about colors fish see and so on. And we changed all that. In-Fisherman literally changed all that. We brought the two together. The fisheries managers, for the most part in the early days, weren't listening too much to fishermen. We helped change that. So this back and forth, this interaction, this camaraderie now that exists between fishery scientists and anglers, that is revolutionized the sport.
And speaking of game changers and innovations, that was something that you wrote about,
right,
Thomas, in your article, and so you can point to a lot of those things.
Well, and that goes back to we needed more pages. Because it was easy to find 50 things, and we had 2 pages to work with on that particular piece. But that was one of the comments that I got back this year with this issue was I mentioned the Lowrance. The fish locator.
The green box.
The green box, the original sonar that anglers were using. And it's just a simple mention, but, that's an integral part to fishing electronics, which is something I'm passionate about. So, of course, we had to kind of implement that into the discussion. But, I mean, back in those days, any kind of information that you could have about what was beneath the boat, how the bottom played out, maybe a way to determine if fish were there without dropping a line, that was earth-shattering.
Yeah.
Actual game changers, which, by the way, in our space, when you use the word game changer, most of us kind of cringe because it's
We hear it a lot.
we hear it a lot, and most of them are not, but this is an example. So that really kind of set the stage, I think, for advancement and development in electronics. And I mean, you can look across the board with whether it's computers, whether it's TVs. You remember the old Walkman? I mean, that's a funny thing to say how far long ago that was. My kid's a tape and a Walkman. There ain't no way, So I think that there comes a point where you just can't stop it. You let that genie out of the whatever what the heck's the genie live in? Bottle. Is it a bottle?
It's a bottle.
It's just a bottle.
It feels like it's a whatever.
It's a fancy bottle.
It is.
Fancy bottle.
See what trips me up is stupid little things. That wakes me up at night. But anyway, that was kind of the introduction of what we're able to look at underneath the water, and it has advanced rapidly. And I would say that is almost a paradigm to the comment of there were so many game changers early on. That was a slow development. Like, we kind of started seeing fishing electronics take hold, and it was not, it was probably 2 decades of it wasn't super duper fancy electronic, but then all of a sudden we kind of got into that early 2000s, and it really took a sharp turn up.
Yeah.
And that's where we started to see some of the high definition screens. And I mean, Doug, you can talk to some of those older
Cameras.
Yeah, but that's when
cameras.
you started to get into it. So that's the sense that you get from that.
That's true.
Era. So I would go back 20 years, 30 years before that, and I think things actually did progress relatively quickly, but that's another story. I mean, so we went from the green box to a variety of things like that to the LCD, the liquid crystal technology, which and before that we had the paper graphs and that kind of thing, but. I don't think we want to get into that, but even preceding that, Buck Perry revolutionized the 60s and 70s with his use of spoon plugs to find what was happening on the bottom. But eventually he even had in the boat this primitive little thing whereby he could know how deep it was. This sort of even preceded the green box, or was during the same time frame. So lots of stories there.
There are, definitely, and I think the element of keeping up with the Joneses has become an important part of fishing, right? And it's not just in the manufacturing side, but it's in the fisherman, the angler side, where if your neighbor has a new boat or a new rig, you are motivated to an extent to stay up with things. But I think, generally speaking, you can spend a pretty fair amount of money on a boat and have it for 10 or 15 years without any problems. And I think that's a manufacturing enhancement in itself. And you look at some of the first boats that In-Fisherman fished out of, you could pull them behind a station wagon, whereas nowadays you wouldn't imagine hooking up one of our TV boats like the Starcraft STX to a car. But I mean, that's just one of the advancements, but it seems like the competition factor has forced manufacturing advancements almost by the day.
Of course, every season, this is one of the things that impressed me at the beginning was that, when I first got into this deal, and I saw some of like the early quantum reels and that kind of thing, and they didn't work very well. And I thought, oh boy, I can teach these guys something. I'll tell them, what's wrong with the reel. And I soon learned, it was too late for that. They'd already produced the reel.
Yeah.
They sure as hell didn't want to hear about what I had to tell them. Because they were already 2 generations beyond that. So, but yeah, every year, and this is why we get frustrated with some of the lures that get canceled. They can be a great lure, but they simply don't sell enough of them to justify the company continuing. And they also know quite well that new stuff sells. Old stuff doesn't sell.
Let's each give an example. What's a lure that you loved and cherished that they don't make anymore?
Well, one of the first that comes to mind, and there are dozens, would be there was a Rapala, and of course the Rapala, historic lure. Rapala minnow until recently was the largest selling. Now I think it's the jigging Rap has sold more than the original minnow. But so I was a shorecaster back in the day. Boots on, night fishing, fall, spring, shorecasting for walleyes. Well, One of the greatest lures of all times was the Husky Rapala, which was a size number 13, so 13 centimeters, but it had a bigger body, so it had more balsa in it. So you could doctor this by drilling it and putting lead in it, so you could cast farther and you could cast into the wind. Well, that lasted about 4 years, and then that was gone. And I caught like I don't know how many hundreds of walleyes over 8 pounds with that combination, which was quickly, off the gone, so.
Well, there are lots of examples. Do you have one, Jim?
Kind of a Rapala. For a while there, they stopped making my special fat wrap it was my go-to. I mean, I remember being at Fishing League, and that was the only thing that was catching fish.
That's
and
why you didn't win the league that year.
I did not win it that year. But they stopped making it for a while, and I ended up losing, got bit off a few times and lost them, my collection of them, and they stopped making it. And then they brought them back, thankfully.
Do they have it now, the fat wrap?
I'm not sure now.
I don't think so.
I don't think they do. But, I mean, at times, that was my go-to. So,
Rob, do you have one?
Not anything in particular, but there's been a ton of that's happened in the soft bait world a lot, where a favorite soft bait has disappeared.
Well,
or it could even be a color, like with the the Berkeley, the 4-inch power minnow. Or we used to fish the one of the flukes too that got canceled. It was a fluke, I guess. And they still make a 5-inch fluke. But
one of the early paddle tails, the
paddle tails. There's been many generations of paddle tails because I've been intimately involved.
He has been intimately involved with those.
And they come and they go,
but then there's some out there now that are unbelievably effective. And are really good.
So. One of my favorites, and I think I found a package or two laying around here, but the 5-inch chigger craw is one that I just love that you can't.
I fished that for many a year.
And I had one or two packages, and it still had the foil color background, so it was an older.
I have some, but they're quite expensive.
Like, how expensive are we talking?
Well, one of the two biggest bass that I ever caught was caught on that lure, and it's on one of your secret lakes over that way to the west of us. And I estimated the fish to be in the 7-pound class. So it was caught in October as a jig trailer, obviously. And what the base you're talking about, I think, was 5 inches long, and it had the great big, and of course the chigger craw is just it's a classic, all-time classic in 3 and 4 inches anyway. But the 5-incher just woga through the water.
And you hardly needed a weight on it because it break through mats. Mark Sexton designed the chigger craw.
Yes.
So and that lure was designed in Iowa, tested on those little lakes out that way. So it has some history here that I find fascinating. But the one that I saw in the magazine here, you did the piece about the bass fishing. I'll just skip right to it. There's the sluggo is in here. I watched. I think it might have been Bass in the Grass. Remember that video? And I think you were using a sluggo. I'm like, I'm gonna go get some of those, and I was able to find them. And this has been 20 years, anyways. And they wore those things out, and they were fairly durable.
Yeah, it was one of the first ways that you could really fish on top through grass mats and that kind of thing if it was rigged exposed. So that's probably what you were seeing.
Yeah, and that's in
I don't remember that.
The history-making largemouth moments with Steve Quinn. But it's just so hard to not value that lure. I mean, it was important then, and I think there's variations nowadays that are probably as effective. But that was one of those game changer style lures,
right?
And there's very few of them in this industry, so that was neat. One of the things I want to talk to now is Bassmaster, back in the day, has a lot of studies to support the catch and release format in fishing, where they have the live wells with the aerators, and there's a lot of proof that works, and it keeps the sport intact and what have you. But In-Fisherman had the selective harvest mentality, which is not to oppose that in any way, shape, or form, but it's to take the stand that, hey, a lot of fishing does include harvest and consumption. And I know that's something that's very close to your heart. You love to eat every fish you catch.
Well, I've always been intrigued with cleaning and fish. I don't know why. It's just always, when I was, there's a photo somewhere of me at 4 years old cleaning bullheads at Triggs Resort, which is between Upper or Lower Gar and East Okoboji, and it's after dark, and there's a light bulb coming down off of something, and there's a fish cleaning spot, and I'm there with mosquitoes being hoarded around me, cleaning bullheads at 4 years old. So it's something, I don't know why, but so I like it's one of the key reasons that I continue to fish, because I love to catch fish and eat them and clean them, and I'm not too good at cooking them, but I'm passively.
I don't know about that.
So anyway.
But that's been a key staple at In-Fisherman, is to selectively harvest fish.
Well, we started out when I still got here, which was in '81. Started writing the Bits and Pieces column in '78, and at that point, In-Fisherman was still full bore into using stringer shots for the most part in the magazine, and so we go through that. This selective harvest thing. We go through that in one of the articles in this magazine and kind of go through the history of how that all started to change. And by the early 1980s, we also were into catch and release fishing. So then we went through this sort of 5 or 10 year period where catch and release was such a big deal. And this was especially true for where you were with Bassmaster for, years. The bass mentality, in my mind anyway, actually went too far on the swing of things, to the point where you had bass anglers, instead of being harvest-oriented, were anti-harvest. Yeah. If you were caught down south cleaning bass, you were likely to be lynched, for a few years there. And we had to get away from that. And In-Fisherman has always been closer to the harvest mentality, and it just makes sense. You release the larger, bigger, less abundant fish to continue good fishing for these bigger fish, while you continue a tradition of harvesting some fish, because when they're harvested wisely, they're a renewable resource, and they're also nutritious and delicious, and just great to eat.
And Rob, there's a benefit to harvesting fish sometimes to the fishery.
Absolutely. As Doug said, the catch and release philosophy ethic almost got too good, too effective, or too popular. In some cases, harvesting fish can benefit the fishery, benefit growth rates of the individuals.
It's still a problem today.
You look at a small impoundment, for example, that has an overabundant bass population. It's too high a density. Mm-hmm. The fish just aren't growing to a good quality size. There's an example
for food. Right?
There's an example where like a slot length limit might work, and the slot length limit relies on some mortality or harvest of fish, small fish, to kind of thin that population of small fish to grow larger fish. It reduces competition. And so those messages we tried to deliver those messages over the years. And
my son, he'd lose his mind if you suggested he eat a smallmouth. And I know that.
Well, you tell them they're quite good, the smaller sizes.
Well, and you had told me once your favorite fish to eat from Minnesota. Largemouth.
Well, I like them all, up to a point. I love crappies too, and I like walleyes. But largemouths are absolutely, to me, one of the most delicious fish there is. Nutty, clean flavor, beautiful fish on the table.
Not an 8-pounder, but the small ones.
No, 12 inches.
12 inches, and there's a lot of those. There's a lake here in town that's full of bass. It could use a little bit of harvest. So there was some science behind. It wasn't just promoting the eating and consumption of fish. There was a management philosophy behind that as well.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So super important. Let's go to the back of the magazine. This is something I always enjoy reading. The North with Doc has been a part of this publication for a long time, and I'm sure you could tell some stories. Didn't you remove it once and got chastised for it?
We always would. Typically, you get to the end, as Rob was talking about, and then you have too much editorial for the number of pages you have, so then you have to cut something. So the first thing we typically would look at are the shorter columns, because that's typically what you need to cut, 1, 2, 3, 4 pages. So occasionally we would cut North with Doc, and holy moly, the letters would pour in. You dumb, you got one more issue. If I never see this again, you're done for, and this kind of thing.
The phone would ring, alarms are going off. It's
most popular column in the history of the magazine, I am pretty sure. So, and it's just so well written. So,
well, tell me a little bit about it. How did you discover the theme. And is it the same gentleman been producing it?
Yeah, Greg Knowles has been writing it, and Peter Kosat, the brilliant illustrator, has been doing the cartoons for more than 200 issues. So Greg, like so many people, wrote a letter over the transom, gets to my desk. He's proposing to write this column, this funny column. So I look at it, and it looks like it might have some potential, but who knows? So we try a couple of them, not in Fisherman, but in the Walleye Insider at the time. Was another issue that we had done. And he says, I don't remember what he suggested it should be called, but I was the one who, I don't know where it came from, suggested, well, why don't you just call it, because it's always going to be taking place at this fly and fishing camp, at least for the most part. I said, why don't you just call it North with Doc, because Doc was the principal guy that he had in there, which was a dentist, his doctor friend, so that's where it came from. But it has nothing to do with me whatsoever. It's all the brilliance of Greg, and some of this stuff is just so off the wall, but it's also just so characteristic of what might happen if you put 5 guys together in a fishing camp. For
Yeah, exactly.
Well, there are some. I've joked about doing a North with Doc podcast, where anytime we could get into a position like a place like that, and just unfortunately, I fear it would be unpublishable. It'd probably be rated R, anyways. But just to
yeah, I've always wondered if just.
Oh, you've got a mug?
Here's a North with Doc mug that has Peter Kolsat's art on it. Peter just had a few made up and sent them to us. They're
that's great.
Really cool. So they're one of a kind sort of coffee mugs.
And I just sent the June version off to Peter, and while I'm reading it, it just cracks me up. I mean, every time I'm just sitting there laughing at it because I can picture exactly what's going on. I mean, it's just so well written.
Well, I mean, and that comes back to having been there, right?
Yeah.
You have buddies you like to fish with and spend time in camp with, and the shenanigans are it never ends. And I guess if there's a way to convey that part of a fishing experience, back of the magazine cartoon seems like the most excellent way to do that.
Yep.
I still want to get my nipple story in there somehow, which we're not going to tell in this episode. It's on another couple episodes.
Well, Bassmaster had the characteristic also version of that with now who wrote it? North with Charlie and.
I should know this and I don't. It's too early.
So yeah. Well, anyway, that played for many a year.
Well, and inside this 50th anniversary edition, you still get what you're promised in a magazine. You have the multi-species, the different locations. You've got the various contributing writers and a seasonality to it, and we're going to continue on that path.
Absolutely,
it's important that people have something to look forward to, and I think that I feel like when we create a magazine, I don't know that the folks that have subscriptions are going to be as critical about the artwork and everything, but the newsstand component to it. I know that you said 20% newsstand sales. That to me is where the work that everybody puts together just absolutely shines. And I think when you're wanting to have that experience walking up to the rack, or you want that magazine to pull you over there, right? You want to be forced to pick it up, forced to open it up. That's where the art, the insight, the science, everything that comes together in one place. To me, the newsstand, which is a traditional way of purchasing and consuming media, I don't know that it's necessarily going away yet, but it's changed, hasn't it?
Oh, sure. Yeah. Drastically. Immensely.
How did In-Fisherman survive the threat of magazines are going away?
Simply, I think, a matter of what we're talking about. There's an excellence to it. There's a uniqueness to it. The poor stuff just simply did not survive. Part of what we're talking about is the 3 stools of what it takes to fund a magazine. So you have subscriptions, you have newsstand sales, and then you have sales for ads and that kind of thing. And so all of those things have changed. The consolidation in our industry of all of, instead of Rapala being Rapala, they've now become how many different, they've bought Blue Fox, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Where we used to get 5 ads, which meant 10 more editorial pages, was all consolidated down into one ad. So that ruined some of our ability to do editorial pages. So that's one stool. Then on the the magazine side of things, there just isn't that kind of space anymore. And bookstores have disappeared. I mean, you've got maybe one major bookstore line instead of many that are out there. So on all these levels, there was all of this change, and to make it through that, you had to be doing something unique enough to gather people in and continue to want to look at it. And there are still people, as you know, because you work so much in the digital world, that there are still some people who prefer the paper magazine. They want to sit there and look at this,
well,
and so on.
I was in the airport the other day, and I was just checking out the newsstand. It was one of the, I don't know if it was Hudson News or whatever the chains are. And the newsstands in airports, the magazine newsstands are pretty small. They're not,
Yeah.
Well, they used to have whole bookstores in airports.
Right.
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah. But In-Fisherman I think they had 3 different magazines represented on that newsstand. That was kind of cool to see.
Well,
Which airport?
Yeah, Minneapolis.
Minneapolis.
Yeah.
I've seen them at other weird airports as well. I mean, it just where they pop up. But see, the tangibility side, Jim, that's your department. You want this thing to be attractive and the feel, the look, and that's the comment that we got here. But you did something unique on this cover, and I'm not going to even pretend to know what we did, but the glossy gold colors.
Yep.
Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, we went, I mean, this is a big deal. It's their 50th. So we initially, I mean, it had to have some metallic ink on it. So that was always going to be a part of it. So I was designing it early on with that in mind. The interesting thing at the tail end of this, when we sent it to the press, I haven't worked with metallic inks in over 20 years, so the production side of it changed quite a bit. So thankfully, Jean, our production manager, her and I figured this out, and we sent it off, and it printed exactly the way it's supposed to. But yeah, it's a metallic ink, so it's a 5th run. There's 4 color and then 1 more run of metallic ink, which really makes it pop. And that's what this cover had to do, because it's a special one. So
It really is. I mean, that color, the way it pulls you in, you have to open it. And I mean, to get people to turn the page, there's a little bit of, I don't want to say science, but there's an element of the way the page is laid out, the way the cover looks, that make people naturally want to open it up. What is your insight to that? You have demands on a cover. Like if I'm going to send you a photo, it's got to be this way to work.
right, and the beauty of that is we're continuing to use Larry Tople's work. So I mean that really gears the cover to a great, that's a great start, and really there's no one that can surpass that. So then the rest of the design, and there was talk that we should redesign for the 50th, and now I'm like, the 50th should remain the same for now, and then maybe next year we do a tweak. It's not going to be a redesign, because to me, there's so many dedicated people, our subscriber from the very beginning there, they don't necessarily like a lot of change, and to me, when it's not broke, let's not fix it. So to me, it just needs some little design tweaks that we'll probably look at for maybe next year. But I mean, it is a page turner the way it is. Yep. There's just some dated things design wise that, and we've talked about them, and again, just some little tweak things, nothing major. The cover to me should remain the same. I mean, the In-Fisherman logo, that's our logo. So that's not changing.
I heard something the other day, Doug, maybe you can tell me this. Something about that. The eye in fish looks like a number 1.
Well, it is, and from the very beginning, somehow, the first name of In-Fisherman was the In-Fisherman, and it was, instead of the hyphen between in and fisherman, there was an apostrophe. Mm-hmm. So it was IN apostrophe fisherman, and it was the In-Fisherman. So I'd have to look exactly how long that lasted, but probably a decade, and then we used the hyphen. But from the very beginning, I have no idea. No one has ever explained it to me why instead of a lowercase I in fisherman, we use that the number one. Backwards number one, is it? No,
No, it's
number
right.
one.
It's kind of that follows that same style as that fonts in the R and the M there. That's
Yeah.
I think it used to have a dot.
No,
back
I
in
don't think
early
so.
days, but
We'll
I think
look.
the dot
I don't think
disappeared.
so, but we'll see. By golly.
Well, I don't know if we have any of those old ones in here, but I mean,
Yeah,
it's a piece of art, and I think that as our generations age, I have hope. I know that my daughter and some of her friends like to pick up hard copy books and read them. That is something that seems like it's there. And there was a time where I think we were led to believe magazines were going to die, and some of them didn't survive. But somehow, especially in the outdoor space, there has been a continued push to keep print magazines in the works. And I think it's very important that we have something tangible, something we can all put our work in and see, and then you consume it that way. I joke about this at the beginning, but one of the greatest compliments you can get is someone says, "Yeah, it sits on the back of my toilet." I'm like, "Well, then that means I know you're looking at it," you know.
Yeah.
And there's some value to that. I don't know that this generation is going to be the generation to change hard copy reading. I think it's going to continue to shift. It's going to evolve with the times, but there's something. I don't know what the right word is. Magical's strong, nostalgic's not right. There's something very important about picking something up and reading it, and I think I think everybody would agree here, especially that when you read something online, you're more willing to accept mistakes or the picture's not totally in focus. You're more willing to sacrifice your expectation of quality on something digital, whereas hard copy, it needs to be perfect, and it gets gone through and I know this is always a headache of yours, Rob. Don't tell me you found something, you know. Sometimes that just happens. It's the nature of the beast. But you can go through this magazine, and it's as clean as it comes. So there has to be an editing process that started with your initial design, your assignments, the layout program, getting everything balanced that brings this together into one final product. And if it's not hard copy, it just doesn't have the same value to people. So
Right.
I really hope that as we go forward in this world, and we're gonna wrap up with some future aspirations here with how the magazine looks and what we're going to do going forward. But before we do that, I wanted to read the second note that we have here, and again, I run my mouth, but when I have to read something, it's not going to be that great. But this is from Bill Garvin, a longtime In-Fisherman subscriber. He says, the longtime subscribers, listeners, and TV followers of In-Fisherman and the more serious anglers were blessed and helped them understand that the fishery science and how that knowledge helped them become the best angler they possibly could. Ethically, fun, enjoyment, therapeutically, I'm glad I got on board right off the bat. For those old-timers around from the beginning, it says from the begging.
Yeah.
Thank you, Bill. I appreciate it. I know what you're trying to say. I'm having a hard time reading it. As if they stick with it and learn, the learning never ends. I already read at least 60% of this issue. It's the best issue in In-Fisherman history. And like always, by reading everything over at least 2 or 3 times, it promotes the learning process. Steve kept up the good work, writing as many lessons of fishing as were always needed and appreciated by lots of In-Fisherman anglers all across the country. Please let all the In-Fisherman team know that what makes everything happen in the 50th anniversary issue was the best one ever. So
Thank you. Yeah.
talk about a note that you want to hear.
Yeah, and Bill's a good angler. He's one of our,
Master angler?
I'd call him Hall of Fame master anglers.
Oh, really?
He's
Okay.
always submitting a lot every year, different species, numerous master angler applications.
See, a lot of people don't realize too is if you do these things, if you do all of these magazines right, each article right, if you do justice by each one and it's accurate, these things snowball and they have a life that goes beyond what you can even imagine. I've had people come up to me and start lecturing me about selective harvest. Like I don't know about selective harvest, you know. So it goes. This information goes here, there, it bounces there. The guys who teach the kids at the school or do the tournaments these days. They have this. They got this information from somewhere, and now it's being passed around. And then when it gets passed here, it gets passed over here, and you never know where it ends up. That's why it's so vital that there be science involved, because that's where some of this accuracy comes. And then the writing's got to be great. It can't be tough to read. It's got to flow naturally. It's got to be juicy. It's got to be great. It's got to be, like with Greg and Northwest Dock, it's got to be alive. And that's what gives a life to this, and that's what sends it all around. And that's where that's what we're trying to accomplish.
And after 50 years of it, it's still happening. And I think that's pretty impressive, especially in a world that has kind of set aside print or has made it not as valuable. I think it's still valuable. I think that's an incorrect perception. I think he's right. You learn best when you read things and consume things. And if I want to, change a tire on my car, I could probably go find a YouTube video, right? That might be a quick way to visually learn something. But to really consume the knowledge that is being presented in a magazine like In-Fisherman or some of our other publications, you're investing time by sitting down and reading it, and that naturally makes you more of a sponge, I think, to take in the information that's there.
Yeah.
But, granted, the world has certainly changed with YouTube, which is very helpful at times. So.
Oh, it's saved my bacon a time or two. I can say that right now. But let's talk a little bit about In-Fisherman going forward. Rob, as we have hopes and plans and schemes for the future of this magazine, what do you think are some of the more important criteria we need to follow to make sure that it remains a viable publication?
Keep doing what we're doing. I think that sums it up. I think the In-Fisherman formula for success is we found a formula for magazine success, and just keep moving forward.
Always be hungry for more.
Yeah, absolutely.
More knowledge. Doug, what would your perception be?
Well, I'd have to agree with that, and I'd have to sit and think if there may be some things that Jim is talking about a tweak here. I don't think there's any major overhauls to be done. We've added columns. The marine scene column is a new column, and the column that you're writing, screen scene.
Yep.
Those have been. So there's always something you can add to the. But you've only got so much room, and so you're always making these hard decisions. That's the joke I used to be with Al in the old days. They always called Al Linder Teflon Al, because they'd be coming up to Al and asking, "What can you do? This? Can you do this? Can I write for this?" And then he'd always say, "Go ask Doug," or "Go talk with Doug." And then I'd always have to say no, And so, so you're always not liked just for what you're doing as an editor in chief. It's much easier to be the owner of the publication, I guess.
Well, a funny story that way to go having your phone ringer on.
No, that's me. Sorry
That's
about
okay.
that.
And we'll always, have the multi-species angle to it, and that's been something that I think people have enjoyed. And
Right, that's the fun.
and that makes, I think, being a multi-species angler makes you a better angler overall.
I would completely agree with that. I've had an opportunity in my career to work with and write with some of the best bass anglers in the world, and to me, the ones that stand out as the best are the ones that are multi-species anglers in general. They crappie fish in the off season. They might like to walleye fish. There's a element of understanding your specific favorite fish by fishing for related species in the same system. And one of the things I've totally cherished over the years is the spotlight and the value In-Fisherman's put on catfish. They're not a glamorous, shiny fish like a muskie, but man, they're so high in my level of value that I can't put a price on it. They are one of my favorite species. We've done it together, Rob. It's one of your favorites too.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's an article in here dedicated to how that all happened over the 50 years. Well, it wasn't quite 50 years, but maybe 40.
Yeah,
when it all started back in the day, and getting catfish.
Yeah, the multi-species aspect, but certainly also the overlooked aspect of some of the fish like the gar. And well, the catfish has never been overlooked. It's been overlooked by manufacturers and that kind of thing. But catfishing has always been like the third or fourth most popular fish for anglers to fish for.
Well, and let's put the question to you, Jim. I know that a complete overhaul is probably not necessarily what we're looking at, but to keep it fresh, what is your vision of In-Fisherman going forward?
Yeah, I mean, there's just a few design tweaks. Chuck and I have talked about this, and Chuck's like, this thing hasn't been redesigned in like 13 to 15 years, so it's just time to freshen it up a little bit. And again, it's not broken. I'm not going to try to fix it. There's nothing to fix. There's just some little design tweaks that it needs just to update it a little bit. And yeah, I think that's really all that I think the reader may or may not even notice, but just continue on to create a great publication every time we touch the page.
And it always gets very dangerous to have two art directors sit by themselves without supervision.
Yeah, that's very dangerous and very true.
Well, and Chuck, he's actually just down the hall here. We probably should have set up another mic because he's contributed to this magazine for many, many years too, and we'll have some insight going forward. But it does take an artistic eye to make this thing happen. I mean, there's the technical side of meeting the expectations of the reader with the education. There's the science, there's the fun fishing, there's the gear. We got to talk about gear, but none of that matters if it's ugly. No one's going to open it up if
Absolutely.
It's right. Yep.
black and white and boring. But
yeah,
you look at where it started 50 years ago, that very first magazine, which is a treasured possession to anybody that has it. And if you do, keep it.
Yes, immensely poorly written. But the information is so unbelievable that anyone was willing to sit there and ponder over it. It was amazing. It's amazing stuff.
Well, it's certainly come a long ways, and I realize that tenure is a very important thing in creating the content, experience with the layout, the science behind everything. It's so important to the future of this, but I mean, I'll be honest. I don't want to get all fanboy on you guys, but like it was beyond my wildest dreams to contribute to this thing. In fact, this guy told me no the first time I tried to write something here a long time ago. But
that's because we already had great writers, and there wasn't room for more.
I understand.
Okay,
and fair enough. I just like to make fun of you for that, but it does have a value to people today if they appear in it, on it, have their byline inside of it. I mean, that's why people were asking you, is because there's a value to the human psyche to be published. And that, to me, is the bottom line to why magazines and a lot of print is not going to become fully obsolete. There is a value to having that. And I think that whenever here's an example. In fact, I saw my daughter inside this magazine accidentally somehow. She was on
the F+L+P page.
Yeah. Yep. Well, to that generation who has been, it's concerned that, or there is a concern that generation is going to be done with print. I don't think so, because that still pops up in conversation. Hey, look at this. Or I can show somebody, and even peers to her, some of the other kids that she knows are like, oh, wow, that's really cool. So there's a value, I think, that's never going to disappear. Yep. And I think that it's important. It's incumbent on us to make sure that we stick to all the original expectations of the magazine, but also be open to what it could become. And as technology advances, so does the way people consume media, which is a very fast adapting thing nowadays. Social media, digital content, digital magazines, all that. But the one thing that remains the same is the human nature values something that they can hold, something that's got artistic value, something that has educational value, and something that they can consume with investment and take it out and put it to work on the water.
Absolutely.
Yep.
And that's really what we want. That's our goal. And that's been your goal for how many
Nicely
years?
said, yes. What's that?
How long have you been doing this?
Well, as I said, my first writing for In-Fisherman started in 1977, but then the first Bits and Pieces column appeared in 1978. So just short of 50.
That's the value of passion. I mean, to commit to that, to live this lifestyle for as long as you have. I mean, that's why the value of this magazine is so important today, because it kind of captures a timeline of Doug Stange's mind. It captures, just this 50 years of fishing advancement and development. I don't see how you can put a price on that. So pick it up. It's available at newsstands. You can order it. And I should have had this link handy, but if you go to,
OSG Newsstand?
OSGnewsstand.com. You can purchase that. We encourage you to subscribe because that is not only does that help us keep these magazines in circulation, but that way you don't got to go look for it at the grocery store. And then if you happen to miss out on especially the issue like this one, it's delivered to your mailbox.
It's like buying local eggs.
Yeah.
Keep somebody in business, and that's us.
That's right. So there is value to that, and we appreciate that. So guys, thank you for sitting down. This has been
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm very proud of this magazine.
Yeah.
If I can say so, as a group, you guys especially, we knocked this out of the park.
Thank you.
I think we did. Yeah.
All right, guys, from Jim Nagy, Doug Stange, and Rob Neumann, I'm Thomas Allen. This is In-Fisherman Storyline. This has been a hard copy edition. We'll see you here on the next one.